The phrase that broke the world in two was spoken in a whisper. The kind of whisper you use when you think no one is listening. A conspiratorial hiss of greed. I was in my office, just behind the kitchen, the door ajar enough to catch the drift of their words over the gentle simmer of the day's stock. It was my daughter, Isabel, and her husband Todd. His voice, slick with cheap confidence, cut through the air first. He'll sign anything we put in front of him. The old man is a relic, lost in his memories. A relic, that's what I was to them. Not a father, not the man who taught Isabel how to hold her first chef's knife, not the creator of Sophia's table. The restaurant that had paid for her education and their ridiculously lavish lifestyle. I was just an obstacle. Isabel's reply was even colder, a shard of ice in the warmth of my kitchen. Good. The Burger Blast representative is waiting. Let's get this done before he comes out for his afternoon tea. Let's finally gut this dusty old place and make some real money. Gut this dusty old place. The words echoed in the space where my heart used to be. This place was not dusty. It was my sanctuary, a living monument to my late wife, Sophia. Every copper pot hanging from the rack held a memory of her laughter. The scent of rosemary and slow-roasted garlic was her ghost, a comforting presence I had cherished for 10 years since her passing. And they were going to replace it with the stench of fried onions and corporate sanitation. They were going to erase her. That was their true crime. I stood, my old bones creaking a protest that was silent compared to the screaming in my soul. I walked out of the office, not towards them, but into the main dining room. The lunch service was over, the tables empty but for the single rows Sophia had insisted we place on each one, every single day. I ran a hand over the worn mahogany of our favorite table, Table 7, tucked away in the corner where we had shared countless meals and dreams. It was here she sketched the first logo for Sophia's table on a napkin. They found me there, their faces a mask of feigned concern. Isabel placed a hand on my arm, her touch feeling alien and cold. Dad, we were just talking. We have some exciting news. Todd stood behind her, a folder clutched in his hand, a predatory grin barely concealed. He looked like a wolf who had just cornered a lamb. They had no idea they were facing a lion. He had simply been sleeping. They saw an old man. They didn't see the chef who had built an empire from flour, fire, and love. It's about the restaurant, Todd began, his voice oozing a practiced sincerity that turned my stomach. It's been struggling, Henry. We've been looking at the numbers, and frankly, it's a financial drain. People don't want this kind of food anymore. They want fast. They want convenient. He gestured around the room as if it were a tomb, not a temple of culinary art. The disrespect was a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. I knew the numbers. I saw the statements. I also saw their credit card bills, which they foolishly linked to the business account. The new sports car for Todd, the designer bags for Isabel, the exotic vacations. The restaurant wasn't failing. It was being bled dry by two parasites who mistook my silence for senility. They were the financial drain. They were the rot that had set in, and it was time for some deep, precise butchery. Isabel took over, her voice soft and patronizing. We've found a way to secure our future, Dad. Your future. A wonderful company, Burger Blast, wants to buy the business. They love the location. They're offering a very generous sum, enough for you to retire properly, to not have to worry about a thing. She presented it as a gift, a kindness, the same way a hangman might compliment the sturdiness of the rope he was about to use. They slid the folder across the table. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could feel the cheap corporate gloss of the paper under my fingertips. I could imagine the soulless logo and the pages of legalese designed to strip a man of his life's work. They expected me to argue, to weep, to plead. They were prepared for an emotional outburst from a doddering old fool. They were not prepared for what I did next. I looked at them, my gaze steady, and I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a cold, sharp thing, the kind of smile you might see on a butcher's face right before he makes the first cut. It was a smile that promised retribution, a smile that held 75 years of patience and a lifetime of knowing how to wait for the perfect moment. Their own smiles faltered, Confusion flickered in their eyes. This was not in their script. I was supposed to be the tragic victim, not the architect of their coming demise. Without a word, I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked out of the dining room. I didn't look back. I walked past the kitchen, where my loyal sous chef, Marco, gave me a questioning look. I just nodded to him, a silent reassurance, and continued out the front door into the afternoon sun. The fresh air felt good. It was the air of freedom, the air of a man who had just been handed a declaration of war and found it invigorating. The battle for Sophia's soul had begun. My steps were not those of a defeated man. They were measured, deliberate. Each footfall on the pavement was a beat in the symphony of my burgeoning plan. They thought they owned the restaurant, an amusing, childish notion. They owned the LLC, the operating company I had foolishly gifted them 5 years ago, hoping to inspire a sense of responsibility. But I, Henry Maxwell, owned the building. I owned the bricks and mortar, the very ground they stood on, and more importantly, I owned the ink on the original lease. Once home, I bypassed the living room, with its ghosts of family photos that now seemed like a cruel joke. I went straight to my study, to the old steel filing cabinet in the corner. My fingers, gnarled from decades of gripping pans and knives, traced the familiar labels until they found it. Sophia's Table, Founding Documents. The key turned with a satisfying click. Inside, beneath old menus and supplier contracts, was the master lease agreement, signed by me as landlord and me as the original tenant. My lawyer at the time, a shrewd old fox named Abernathy, had insisted on it. For legacy, Henry, he'd said, to protect Sophia's vision. And there it was, Article 12, Section B, the legacy clause. I read the words, and the cold smile returned to my face. The clause was ironclad. It stated that the lease was contingent on the business operating as a fine dining establishment in the European tradition under the name Sophia's Table, honoring the culinary vision of its founders. Any significant deviation from this concept, any change in branding, or any attempt to reclassify the establishment would render the lease null and void. Upon such a breach, all business assets on the premises, including branding, recipes, and equipment, would revert to the ownership of the landlord. Me, a fast food burger joint was, to put it mildly, a significant deviation. They thought they were selling a business. They were about to find out they were only selling themselves into ruin. The first call I made was to Marco. He'd been with me for 20 years, starting as a terrified dishwasher and rising to become the chef of incredible talent. He was more of a son to me than Todd could ever be a son-in-law. Marco, I said, my voice calm. We have a problem, but I believe we also have a solution. Meet me at my house tonight and bring the good whiskey. I heard the concern in his voice, but also the unwavering loyalty. On my way, chef. When Marco arrived, I laid it all out. The betrayal, the burger blast deal, the arrogance of my daughter and her husband. He listened patiently, his hands clenched into fists, a muscle twitching in his jaw. When I showed him the legacy clause, a slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. Chef, he said, his voice a low growl. This is beautiful. This is a masterpiece of a trap. What's the plan? How do we prepare the final dish for them? The plan was simple in its elegance, like a perfect cacio e pepe. 3 ingredients: patience, precision, and public humiliation. We let them proceed, I explained. We let them get so close to the money they can taste it. We let them announce their grand victory to the world. We let them sign the final papers and hand over the keys to a kingdom they don't actually own. And then, at their moment of ultimate triumph, we pull the tablecloth out from under them. Over the next few weeks, I played the part of the broken old man. I was quiet, withdrawn. I'd visit the restaurant and sit at table 7, nursing a single espresso, letting Isabel and Todd think they were witnessing a man in mourning for his lost legacy. Their pity was a disgusting cloak they wore to hide their guilt. But I let them wrap me in it. Their arrogance grew with each passing day, making them sloppy, making them blind. Then their next move came. It was petty, and it was cruel. Marco called me one morning, his voice tight with rage. Chef, you need to see this. He sent me a link. Online reviews. A sudden flood of one-star ratings for Sophia's table on every platform. Anonymous accounts spewing lies. Cockroach in my soup. The chef was drunk and abusive. Gave my whole family food poisoning. It was a coordinated attack designed to devalue the restaurant's reputation, likely to justify the low sale price to Burger Blast. They were trying to poison Sophia's name. They were desecrating her memory with cheap lies to make a few extra dollars. This was no longer just about business. It was about honor. I looked at the picture of Sophia on my mantle, her smile so full of life and passion. "They won't get away with this, my love," I whispered to her. "I promise." My resolve hardened from steel into something far more unbreakable. Marco and I began our own quiet counteroffensive. We contacted our most loyal customers, the families who had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries with us for decades. We didn't ask them to write fake reviews. We simply asked them to share their honest memories of Sophia's table. The response was overwhelming. A tidal wave of 5-star reviews and heartfelt stories washed over the fake negativity, drowning it in a sea of genuine affection and loyalty. But that was just defense. I needed to prepare my attack. There was another secret I held, one Ethan Marco didn't know about yet. 6 months ago, before the worst of Isabel's greed had surfaced, I had done something on a whim. It was an act of love, a tribute to my wife. On my desk was a heavy, unopened envelope with an international postmark. It held the results. It was time to see if my faith in Sophia's genius was about to be rewarded. I had meticulously recreated Sophia's signature dish, her tagliatelle au ragu. It wasn't just a recipe. It was our love story in a bowl. The long, patient simmering of the sauce was our courtship. The hand-rolled pasta was the delicate dance of our life together. I had filmed the process, written down her story, and submitted it to the most prestigious culinary competition in the world, the Prix d'Or Culinaire, in a special category for legacy recipes. My hands trembled slightly as I slid a letter opener under the seal of the envelope. It felt heavier than it should, as if it contained the weight of my entire life. I unfolded the thick, watermarked paper. The words were in French, but a few stood out immediately, shining like beacons of hope. Félicitations, Premier Prix, exceptionnel. I had to read it 3 times before the reality sunk in. We had won. Sophia's recipe, our recipe, had been judged the best in the world. A low laugh escaped my lips. It started as a chuckle and grew into a full, booming laugh that filled the quiet study. It was the laugh of a man who had just been handed a cannon in the middle of a knife fight. Isabel and Todd were trying to sell a failing local eatery for scrap value. They had no idea they were sitting on a gold mine, a restaurant that was, at this very moment, the most celebrated in the entire culinary world. Their ignorance would be their downfall. I tucked the letter away. This was the ace of spades. You don't play a card like that early. You save it for the final hand, the moment when all the chips are on the table. The press conference they were planning to announce the Burger Blast deal would be the perfect venue. They wanted a spectacle. I would give them one they would never, ever forget. I would let them build the stage for their own execution. During this time, I noticed the change in my granddaughter, Clara. Isabel's daughter was a sharp young woman trapped in a corporate job she hated. She'd stop by, her visits brief and strained, echoing her mother's narrative about my supposed decline. "Grandpa, Mom's just trying to make sure you're taken care of," she'd say, her eyes not quite meeting mine. She was repeating a script, but I could see the doubt in her face. She remembered Sophia's kitchen. She remembered the magic. One afternoon, she found me looking at old photos of Sophia. "You miss her a lot, don't you?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "More than the air I breathe," I replied honestly. "This restaurant, it's all I have left of her." I saw a flicker of understanding, a crack in the corporate armor her parents had built around her. I decided to plant a seed. "They think her legacy is worthless, Clara. Soon, the whole world will know just how wrong they are." The day of the press conference arrived. Isabel and Todd had rented a small ballroom at a local hotel. It was garish and impersonal. Everything Sophia's table was not. They had invited local news, food bloggers, and business journalists. I saw my daughter preening for the cameras, Todd standing beside her, his chest puffed out like a proud pigeon. They were radiating the smug satisfaction of people who believed they had won. I arrived just as they were about to begin, dressed not in a suit, but in my crisp light chef's jacket, the one with Sophia's table embroidered over the heart. It was cream, pressed, and it felt like armor. I didn't take a seat in the back. I walked slowly, deliberately down the center aisle and stood at the very front, just to the side of the stage. My presence caused a murmur to ripple through the room. Isabel shot me a look of pure venom, while Todd's smile tightened at the edges. They ignored me and launched into their speech. Todd spoke of modernizing the culinary landscape and synergistic brand partnerships. Isabel talked about a difficult but necessary decision and honoring my father's need to rest. The lies flowed from their mouths, smooth and practiced. They were selling a narrative of compassionate children helping their aging father into a comfortable retirement, while in reality, they were pawning his soul for a quick payday. Then came the grand announcement. A slick corporate video for Burger Blast played on a screen behind them. And so Isabel announced, her voice filled with fake emotion. It is with a heavy heart, but great excitement for the future, that we announce the sale of the Sophia's Table business to the Burger Blast family. The representative from the fast food chain, a man with a plastic smile and vacant eyes, joined them on stage. They held up a giant novelty check. The applause was polite, scattered. The journalists in the room smelled a story, but they weren't sure what it was yet. This was my cue. I stepped forward, not onto the stage, but to the microphone, set up for questions. I didn't need to shout. My voice, seasoned by decades of commanding a busy kitchen, cut through the room with absolute authority. A wonderful presentation, I began, my tone dangerously pleasant. But you seem to have overlooked a few key ingredients in your little recipe for success. Isabel's face went pale. Todd stepped forward. Dad, this isn't the time or the place. On the contrary, I said, holding up the single crisp document for all to see. I believe this is the perfect time and place. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the original lease agreement for the building at 12 Elm Street, the building that I own. I'd like to direct your attention to Article 12, Section B, the Legacy Clause. A hush fell over the room. The trap was sprung. I let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly sharpened knife. The clause, I continued, my voice resonating with a clarity that belied my age, stipulates that the lease and all assets therein are contingent on the restaurant operating under the name Sophia's Table and honoring its founding culinary principles. Selling it to become a Burger Blast, I believe you'll agree, constitutes a rather significant breach of that contract. A breach which renders the lease and their right to sell anything completely void. The Burger Blast representative snatched the lease copy from Todd's trembling hand. His plastic smile had melted, replaced by a mask of horror as he read the clause. He looked from the paper to me, then to the pair of liars on the stage. He slowly backed away from them, as if they were suddenly contagious. The giant novelty check now looked absurd, a prop in a tragedy. The cameras, sensing blood in the water, turned from the stage and focused entirely on me. Isabel finally found her voice, a shrill, desperate sound. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a confused old man. The lawyers approved everything. Todd nodded vigorously, his face slick with sweat. This is just a tactic, a sad attempt to stay relevant. They were trying to paint me as senile, a final, pathetic insult. But the journalists were smarter than that. They saw the truth in the cold, hard print of the contract. Confused, I asked, raising an eyebrow. Perhaps. But I was clear-headed enough to do one other thing they are not aware of. I nodded toward the back of the room. On cue, Marco, my loyal Marco, walked in carrying a framed certificate. You see, you've been trying to sell Sophia's Table under the premise that it is a failing, irrelevant, dusty old place. You have been slandering my wife's legacy to justify its destruction. Marco set up an easel next to me, What you and the Burger Blast Corporation failed to realize, I said, my voice swelling with pride and love, is that 6 months ago, I submitted Sophia's signature ragu recipe to the Prix d'Or Culinaire, the most prestigious food award on the planet. I paused, letting the weight of the name sink in. As of this morning, Sophia's Table is not a failing local restaurant. It is the official home of the best legacy dish in the entire world. I unveiled the certificate. The room exploded. Camera flashes went off like a firestorm. Reporters shouted questions, no longer interested in a fast food franchise deal. The story was now me. It was Sophia. It was the incredible, unbelievable betrayal and the even more incredible vindication. Isabel and Todd stood frozen on the stage, their faces a grotesque tableau of shock and disbelief. Their scheme had not just failed, it had spectacularly backfired in the most public way imaginable. Isabel stared at the certificate, the gold leaf glinting under the lights. The name Sophia Maxwell was inscribed in elegant calligraphy. I saw her lips form a single, silent word. No. It was the sound of her greed crumbling to dust. All the easy money, the lavish lifestyle, gone in an instant, replaced by the stark reality that they had tried to trade a priceless diamond for a handful of gravel, and had ended up with nothing but dirty hands. Todd was the first to completely break. He started babbling, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This is a trick. It's a forgery. He's trying to ruin us." But his hysteria only made him look more guilty. The Burgerplast man was already on his phone, likely speaking to his legal team, his face grim. He didn't even look at my daughter and her husband as he strode out of the room, leaving them alone on their sinking ship. They were swarmed by reporters. "Isabel, were you aware of the award?" "Todd, what about the legacy clause? Ain't your company bankrupt?" Their meltdown was pathetic and complete. They were exposed, stripped of their lies, and left with only their naked, ugly ambition. I watched for a moment, feeling not triumph, but a profound sadness for the daughter I had lost, long before this day. Then I turned and walked away from the wreckage of their lives. I saw Clara in the crowd. She wasn't with the throng of reporters. She was standing near the back, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. Our eyes met across the chaotic room. In her gaze, I saw not pity for her parents, but a dawning, horrified understanding. She saw me, truly saw me for the first time in years, not as a relic, but as the grandfather who had loved her, the chef who had built a dream. The seed I had planted had finally broken through the soil. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story was everywhere. Chef's revenge, culinary legend saves wife's legacy from greedy heirs. Phones at the restaurant, which had been silent for weeks, rang off the hook. We were booked solid for the next 6 months. Marco and I were back in the kitchen, not gutting it, but polishing the copper until it shone, prepping for the grand reopening. The air was filled, not with despair, but with the delicious aroma of possibility. The consequences for Isabel and Todd were swift and severe. Burger Blast sued them for fraud and misrepresentation. The bank called in the loans they had taken out against the business they no longer controlled. They had to sell their oversized house, their sports car, all the trinkets of their hollow life. But the financial ruin was nothing compared to the social exile. They became a local cautionary tale, the greedy children who tried to sell their mother's soul. 1 week after the press conference, there was a tentative knock on my door. It was Clara. She looked smaller, humbled. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. She clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. "I quit my job," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I told them I was going to learn a real trade." She looked at me, her eyes full of a remorse that felt genuine. "I was so wrong, Grandpa. I listened to them, to their poison. I forgot what was real." She took a shaky breath. Is there any place for me at Sophia's table? I'll wash dishes. I'll scrub floors. I just want to learn. I want to be a part of something that matters." It was the most honest thing I had heard from a member of my immediate family in years. I looked at her, and for the first time since Sophia had passed, I saw a flicker of my wife's spirit in my family's eyes. The same passion, the same yearning for something real and tangible. My heart, which had been a fortress of cold resolve, allowed a small crack of warmth to enter. Vengeance had been served. Now, perhaps it was time for grace. But on my terms. The kitchen opens at 5 a.m., I said simply. Don't be late. The floors need a good scrubbing. A relieved sob escaped her lips, and she nodded, a real grateful smile finally reaching her eyes. The relationship wouldn't be fixed overnight. Trust, like a good sauce, takes a long time to build. But it was a start. It was a single, fresh ingredient in a recipe I thought had been spoiled forever. Sophia would have liked that. She always believed in second chances, as long as they were earned through hard work. The grand reopening of Sophia's table was a night I will never forget. The old sign, newly polished, glowed warmly over the entrance. Inside, every table was filled with old friends and new admirers. The sound of happy chatter and the clinking of glasses was the most beautiful music. Marco ran the kitchen like a seasoned general, his crew moving with a fluid grace that made my old heart swell with pride. Clara was in the thick of it, not scrubbing floors, but learning the books from Marco's wife, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was meticulous, sharp, and for the first time in her life, she looked truly happy. She was earning her place, one invoice at a time. She was reconnecting with her grandmother's legacy, not as an inheritance to be cashed in, but as a responsibility to be cherished. I heard whispers that Isabel and Todd had left town. They couldn't face the community they had betrayed. They left a trail of debt and disgrace behind them, a bitter legacy of their own making. I felt no joy in their ruin, only a quiet finality. They had made their choices. They had gambled with my love and my wife's memory, and they had lost everything. Justice, I reflected, is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet closing of a door. That night, after the last customer had left, I stood in the silent kitchen. The smells of garlic, wine, and roasted meat lingered in the air like a comforting spirit. This was my home. This was Sophia's soul. I had fought for it, not with anger and rage, but with the tools of my trade, patience, knowledge, and a deep respect for the ingredients. The most important ingredient, I realized, had always been love. Months turned into a year. Sophia's table was more successful than ever. The Prix-d'Or culinaire hung in the entryway, a testament not just to a recipe, but to a life lived with passion. It drew people from all over the world who came not just for the food, but for the story. The story of a love that was stronger than greed, a legacy that refused to be erased. Clara became my right hand. She had a natural instinct for the business, but more than that, she had her grandmother's warmth. She learned the stories behind every dish. She treated our staff like family. She understood that we weren't just selling food, we were serving memories. She had finally come home, and in doing so, she had helped me find my way back as well. One afternoon, she came to me in the kitchen while I was teaching her how to properly roll tagliatelle, just as Sophia had taught me. "Grandpa," she said, her hands dusted with flour, "I found some of Mom's old things in storage." There was a photo album. She showed me a picture of a teenage Isabel, standing in this very kitchen, beaming with pride, as she held up a slightly misshapen cake she had baked with her mother. I looked at the girl in the photo, so full of promise, and felt a pang of the old sadness. "She loved it here once," Clara said quietly. "Before everything." "I know," I replied, my voice thick. "Greed is a poison, Clara. It makes you forget who you are. It makes you forget what love tastes like." She nodded, understanding perfectly. We worked in silence for a moment. The rhythmic slap of dough on wood, a comforting metronome. That evening, during service, I watched Clara move through the dining room. She stopped at table 7, our old table, and adjusted the single rose in the vase, just as her grandmother used to. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. It was a sign that the legacy was safe. It was alive, breathing, and in the hands of someone who finally understood its true worth. My revenge was complete, but it had not left me bitter. It had cleansed me. It had burned away the rot and allowed for new growth. I had not destroyed my family. I had simply pruned the diseased branches to save the tree. And in their place, a new, healthier branch was growing, reaching for the light. Family, I've learned, is not just about blood. It's about respect. It's about honoring the sacrifices of those who came before you and protecting the dreams they built. Isabel and Todd saw their family tree as a resource to be clear-cut and sold for lumber. They forgot that the roots are what give it life, what hold it steady in the storm. My life was simpler now, but richer. My days were filled with the familiar rhythms of the kitchen, the scent of fresh bread, the sound of my granddaughter's laughter. I wasn't a relic anymore. I was a teacher. I was a guardian. I was a chef, back where I belonged, with a full reservation book and a full heart. Sometimes late at night, when the kitchen is quiet and clean, I can still feel Sophia's presence. She's in the warmth of the stove, in the lingering scent of time. I imagine her smiling, her hands on her hips, nodding in approval. We did it, my love, I'll think to myself. We saved our table. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it is about restoration. It's about taking something that has been broken and making it whole again. My daughter and her husband chose a path of empty calories and quick consumption. I chose the slower, harder path, the path of flavor developed over time, of love simmered into every bite. The world rushes on, chasing the new and the shiny, but I have found that there is a profound strength in tradition, a deep satisfaction in preserving what is good and true. They called me old-fashioned, and I suppose I am. I believe in hard work, I believe in loyalty, and I believe that the best meals are the ones seasoned with memory. Clara is now creating her own dishes, inspired by her grandmother's recipes, but with her own unique touch. A little more spice here, a modern technique there. She is not replacing the legacy. She is adding to it, ensuring it continues to evolve and thrive for generations to come. That is the greatest vindication of all. I no longer think of what Isabel and Todd did with anger. I think of them with a distant pity. They are starving, not for food, but for the very things they tried to destroy: authenticity, purpose, and love. They will spend the rest of their lives chasing empty plates, never knowing the satisfaction of creating a meal that can feed a person's soul. Tonight, as I watch Clara plate her first special, a beautiful risotto that smells of saffron and spring, I see the future. It is bright and warm. It is filled with the promise of good food and the comfort of family that has been tested and rebuilt, stronger than before. My name is Henry Maxwell, and I am a chef. And my kitchen is finally at peace. They thought the old man was a forgotten recipe, a dish no one ordered anymore. They forgot that the classics never go out of style. They forgot that I was the one who wrote the cookbook. And now, my wife's legacy, our legacy, is the special of the house. Every single day, and it is magnificent.